Good morning. It's good to have everybody here today. You know, there are those times and situations in a family, be it church or family or friends, that everyone involved remembers. Some cannot be repeated, but when I meet with Mike Korak, we have the usual comments about the weather and how the kids are doing and that sort of chatter. But if we linger long enough, one of us will recall about 25 years ago when we were shoveling pigeon droppings out of the bell tower. The roof was going on, the new louvers for the tower were on order, and there we were, hats and masks and long sleeves, and shoveling and loading buckets of this stuff and lowering it down to the dumpster. When I meet with my brother Andy for a round of golf, there often will be one hole that reminds him of his hole in one. He never wants me to forget that. I was with my extended family at a wake once when a cousin remembered Al's beans. Now, we were all there at my mother's family's Christmas smorgasbords and enjoyed the Swedish meatballs and the fish soup and pickled herring, but Al's beans? She assured us of their existence, and we finally remembered the casserole. Why that memory stuck with her, I don't know. You see, Al had married into the family, and after his wife died way too young, he kept coming to the reunions and brought his late wife's favorite recipe. The opportunity to share story is like those examples, one that's remembered and cherished and repeated by my family many times, each with their own rendition. It's about a comment my father made to me at dinner time when I was probably 10 or 12 years old. See, I grew up in this church's parsonage, one that was built by this church in the 1890s and served the ministers and their families until the 1980s when it was sold. I tell you this because there was a certain rhythm to our lives, and it did tend to revolve around this church. Even though it was not forced on us, but as kids you figured out the pattern. Sunday was church, of course. The weather didn't matter if it was too hot or too cold or too in between. Church was on Sunday. But the rest of the week also had church elements. Saturday night until early mornings, Dad was typing the sermon. Thursday was finishing the bulletin, picking out the hymns, etc. And during the week we heard stories. For Dad was a voracious reader, and especially at dinner time, the stories would come out. Sometimes we didn't know if they were true or not. There was a man with a square pupil and one that had a gold star in his middle tooth. But he was a history major in his undergrad days and loved to understand the genealogy of families. Sometimes the lines blurred and you didn't know if it was a biblical family, a family here in town, or my own family. But they were great stories, and I'm sure that the sermon topic or lesson was on his mind also. And those ideas made it into the conversation. As I remember that time, we were at a round table in the dining room of the parsonage, 4 kids and my parents. I was at my dad's left and so on around the table. And Mom was a good cook, although we did have a lot of chicken. It was always good, but she had a pork chop dish that I never got tired of. That evening we talked about the day and school and homework, and towards the end a story started. I probably wasn't paying a lot of attention or daydreaming like a third grader does or whatever, and I was down to my last bite of food, just not finishing my meal, when my dad said to me, "John, you have the opportunity to share," as he speared the last piece of pork chop and ate it. That got my attention. I must have looked a bit surprised on my face as I stammered out my protest, and we all had a good laugh. He wanted the meal over to have dessert. And we use that phrase often. If I thought Tim had too much Halloween candy, I would say, "Tim, you have the opportunity to share." And then we'd proceed to a wrestling match. Where did this sharing bit come from? And over the years, I've reflected on this incident and concluded that what Dad was talking about was giving a lesson on sharing. He was too good a wordsmith and chose his words carefully. He knew words would encourage and educate, and he avoided the words that could be cruel or hurtful. I wish we would have talked about it more, but I missed that opportunity. What if the time had corresponded with the stewardship campaign, sharing your time, talent, and treasure? I'm sure he would have been working on the difference between the obligation of sharing versus the opportunity to share. And I do like that word opportunity also. It's much more optimistic than a chance or an option to share. Look around, and we have the time, talent, and treasure here in this congregation, and we have family and church and community where we have the opportunity to share. Now, my wife asked me a couple of weeks ago how I got into this, doing this homily. I must have been stewing about it, talking to myself as I usually do, and I responded that I was asked by Pastor Deb. I had done the homily before, probably in 2008 and maybe a couple of years ago, and maybe 2 years ago this summer, after the Sunday service, Deb asked me to consider doing one again. But there was another person present when she asked me that. That was Karen Friday. Yes, it was that Karen, the one with a megawatt smile, just before she got sick. But we had known each other for a long time. Some of you remember that she was the church secretary with my dad. I remembered her more from when we sang together in the church choir for a number of years. Then life got in the way and we saw less and less of each other, but we always could get caught up on family and friends whenever we met. After my mother died, I started sitting more or less where I do today, right down here in the sanctuary. And sometimes Karen would just appear on my left and sing the last hymn with me, harmonizing or slipping into parts just as we did in choir. Then after the service, we'd get caught up on the kids and what's going on, and she'd be off. But this one Sunday, she stayed longer, wanting to say hello to Deb, and we both approached her, and she asked me about doing the homily. I begged off. I was still working full-time and trying to negotiate the sale of my shares of the store. Plus, I pleaded, Deb, I don't have a topic or inspiration for a talk. Then Karen said, I always liked the story your dad told about giving you an opportunity to share. Wow. The look on my face must have been the same one I had at that dinner table. How did you know that? She simply stated that my dad often had devotions with the church staff, and that example had been used. Wow. She probably knows about Al's beans. Karen, we've got to talk about this more, but we never did. She soon fell ill, and the moment was lost. But it did confirm what I had always felt, that the opportunity to share was a lesson. The word's chosen for a specific reason. Not that you have a commandment or an obligation to share, whether it be a border or a toy, or that you have to share, and this is how much you are going to share. Here is one of the fundamentals of this church. Here you have the opportunity to share. Amen. Guess we'll sing our middle hymn. Open my eyes that I may see.